In January of 2015, 4 months before our April wedding, my fiancé received an envelope in the mail from his parents. It contained the 2 pages below. It's a literal bill for expenses they had incurred after fiancé had started his full-time job, but was still included on his parents' cell phone, car insurance, and health insurance accounts. I can't locate anything in writing that lists a total for his college expenses, but what I remember from verbal discussions is $88,000 for 2 years. We went to the same private college, so I know that this is pretty accurate. This brings the total amount they were requesting of fiancé to $94,160. Fiancé was completely blindsided and had no memory of ever agreeing to pay his parents back for any of this. When I got to his apartment that day, still ignorant of anything going on, he was on the phone with a friend asking for advice and handed me the envelope as explanation. I was practically gleeful with indignation after seeing the bills and remember laughing a lot that evening at the absurdity of it all. Who does this? Up to that point, I'd had a decent relationship with his parents. Not at all close like I am with my own family, but we got along fine. I'd hear stories of his crazy mom from fiancé and his friends, ranging from quirky, guests weren't allowed to touch the walls in their house, to verbally abusive, insulting fiancé during his teenage years. But I hadn't personally experienced anything from her, yet. After telling his friends about the letter, they all had virtually the same response. Cut them off. Parents don't treat their children that way. They don't deserve to have a relationship with you after this, much less deserve your money. I agreed wholeheartedly, but fiancé didn't find it so easy to disregard the honor your father and mother commandment. One of the reasons I was marrying him was because of his strong morals and values, and those strong morals forced him to treat his parents with respect. His parents were defensive as soon as they answered his phone call. They stood behind their statements 100%, but shut down any and all discussion, thinking it was just fiancé trying to get out of paying them anything. But he was clear that he wanted to be responsible for his cell phone, car insurance, and health insurance costs, as that seemed sensible to him. He just wished they would have been upfront earlier that he'd have to pay them back for all those expenses, because he absolutely would have taken himself off of their accounts and gotten his own, which he did immediately after receiving their letter. He did, however, want to discuss the matter of his college costs. His parents had a college fund saved up for him, and he'd always known about this, even before he started looking at schools. But that fund ran out after his second year in college. His parents agreed to cover his last 2 years out of pocket. Fiancé received a merit-based scholarship from the college, but was ineligible for any other financial aid because his father's income was too high. His mother, of course, hadn't had a job except for a couple years after she graduated. Fiancé remembered hearing about his college fund running out, but doesn't recall the part of the conversation where he agreed to pay his parents back for his next 2 years of college, though his parents insist this discussion took place. Fiancé says he would have dropped out or at least transferred to a less expensive school if he had known this back then. His closest friends from high school didn't go to college, and fiancé only went in the first place because he felt forced to by his parents, in addition to the existence of the college fund. So fiancé wasn't necessarily agreeable to the sudden appearance of $88,000 of student loan debt, but his parents wouldn't entertain any discussion that seemed like fiancé was just trying to get out of paying them back. Until he played the daughter-in-law card. Fiancé mentioned that I was upset or confused or something, and suddenly they agreed to meet up in person to clarify everything. His mother had had a very poor relationship with her own mother-in-law, and as a result had always been resolved to have a good relationship with fiancé's future wife. Hence how nice she'd always played with me up to this point. We went over to their house a few days later, both extraordinarily nervous. I have anxiety now just writing about it. I forget what we had decided we wanted to ask for or where we were drawing the line. All I remember confirming with fiancé was that neither of us were going to sign anything, and you better believe she had a paper for him to sign. I only remember bits and pieces from that meeting. It quickly devolved into a knockdown, drag-out argument, luckily not physical, at least. Surprisingly, even though I, the daughter-in-law, had seemed to be the reason for it taking place, his mother forcibly excluded me from participating in the discussion. You don't know what he was like growing up. Oh yes, the argument dredged up issues from their entire family history. Fiancé respected his mother because they got along well during his early childhood, but their relationship degraded once he began thinking for himself, a major character flaw in her opinion. His father was the more positive force during fiancé's adolescent years, encouraging the hobbies his mother tried to shut down. Building models is the worst thing your teenager could be getting into. And fiancé explained this to them, that he loved and respected them as his parents for these reasons, and didn't understand where this current treatment was coming from. I was in tears relatively quickly watching their complete disregard for the pain they were inflicting on the man I loved, their only son. He felt deeply betrayed at their unwillingness to back down at all from this verbal agreement that only they remember making. I refused his father's offer of tissue, at which point they brought up the old classic, "Oh, now we're the bad guys." I only remember his father raising his voice once or twice, when fiancé suggested they couldn't be trusted not to do something like this again. How dare we call them untrustworthy? The peak of his mother's emotional reaction, oddly enough, or not, came after she brought up grandchildren. I have never wanted kids and had been very clear about that with all of them since the beginning of my relationship with fiancé. And I reiterated that again, but still she persisted. Would we use this to keep them from seeing their grandchildren? We stated that we wouldn't be able to afford to have kids at all if we were paying them this money. I think she asked again, though, if we'd keep their grandchildren from them, and I think I said maybe, or probably. Either way, at the slightest suggestion that her non-existent grandchildren might not be allowed to see her, she started crying and had to leave the room for a few minutes. Other highlights from the argument include my response to her statement of, "You don't know what he was like growing up," probably repeated at least a few times before I responded. I replied, "No, but I know the man he is now, and he's responsible, caring, etc." His father commended me at the end of the argument for having fiancé's back. In fact, his father ended up almost taking our side, trying to get his wife to see where we were coming from. But he's always been too passive, and she's always been the inflexible mastermind. She wrote a few sentences on a piece of notebook paper during the argument and wanted fiancé to sign it, and he adamantly refused. But he was clear that he wanted to at least pay them back for the non-college bills. In fact, fiancé was much more gracious than she deserved throughout the whole meeting ordeal. He listened to rant after rant that I tuned out, repeating her flawed views of reality, such as how delinquent and irresponsible fiancé was and still is. She admitted she still thought of him as a 17-year-old, though he was 25 at the time. From the stories I've heard from his friends, he was easily one of the most responsible of his friend group growing up. He still gets anxiety at even the possibility of breaking a rule. His parents told us outright that the reason they were doing this, going after fiancé for this money, was to teach him a lesson in financial responsibility. For them to forgive this debt, in their minds allowing him to get out of it, would prove that he was financially irresponsible and that they had failed as parents to teach him financial responsibility. The reason they had paid that money in the first place, fiancé's college degree, it was a bachelor's degree in accounting. He'd been working at a wealth management company for nearly 4 years at that time and still works there now. Wealth management. Ducking finance. Anyway, we made it clear to them that even if we did start trying to pay them back, they would never get the entire total back before they died. They're older, around 60 at that time. They didn't need the money because of his father's 6-figure salary, the reason they had been able to pay for college in the first place, and the reason why fiancé was ineligible for financial aid. And we did need the money, as we both made far less than 6 figures and still do. Despite all this, and despite the grandchild threat, they stuck to their guns, and fiancé agreed to send them $100 every month starting a year after we got married, because he felt that was respectful and honorable towards them. I was, and still am, vehemently opposed to allowing her to exert this control over us. But fiancé is a sensible adult, and they're his parents, not mine. I wanted to cancel the wedding and elope, because we'd wanted to elope anyway, and the unexpected appearance of a $90,000 debt is a pretty good excuse. She pulled the only child card, and fiancé didn't want to rob her of her only wedding opportunity. There was also lesser pressure from my family, so the wedding stayed on. But fiancé told them he didn't trust them to be involved or to spend any money on it, because what's stopping them from billing him for that too? They remained deeply offended at any suggestion that they were untrustworthy, and we ended up allowing them to help as long as they only dealt with my family and not fiancé and I directly. They played nice and actually contributed a fair amount of money to the wedding, along with buying the alcohol and making some of the decorations, to my specifications, thankfully. And they didn't mail anyone any bills afterward. I know my family was very grateful to have some of the costs taken care of, as they have 3 other daughters to marry off after me, and my parents make somewhat less than fiancé's father's salary. Fiancé's husband's mother behaved herself at the wedding as well, from what I can remember, other than repeatedly requesting what she insisted were husband's favorite songs and then dancing awkwardly to them by herself. My family was familiar with everything that had happened and would have handled her if she tried anything. And they've been playing nice since then, for the most part, other than the occasional reminder of where their priorities are. He did retire that year. I'm sure our payments really helped. I assume the reminder letter was written up by his mother, and then she just had his dad sign it. His mom also texted husband once or twice, even saying one time that it was his dad using her phone to text, asking if we'd sent the payment, because it was a little late that month or we'd forgotten. Each time, husband either blows up or breaks down. I don't think he ever really healed or came to terms with the fact that they chose money over their son. They play nice to our faces when we visit once or twice a year, so husband probably convinces himself that maybe they really do love him. He defaults to denial when it comes to the payments and has me handle as much as possible so that he doesn't have to deal with it or be reminded of it. So it's my check that they get every month. I wanted it to be that way in the beginning so that they had a visual reminder that it wasn't just husband they were taking this money from. But clearly his mother doesn't mind wielding power over 2 people instead of 1. No surprise there. I also used to write the check out directly to his father only, so that the more rational one of the 2 of them would have to face what he was doing to his son every month and maybe see reason. But not anymore. The checks can go straight to her now. A week ago, husband went to see a classic rock band with his father. Husband doesn't really care for the band, but he knew his father wouldn't go alone, and he wanted to be a good son and do something fun with his dad. The tickets weren't cheap, and they each paid for their own ticket. After the show was over, husband's dad used this bonding opportunity to ask his son for $50 more a month, since husband can afford all these superfluous expenses like concert tickets. Husband was furious. He still insists that it's wrong to not pay them anything, but he told his father never to speak to him again. His father is clearly 100% his mother's puppet now, instead of just wanting to placate her to keep the peace. I hope husband is really done letting them be a bank and his parents at the same time, but they'll still get their check every month. P.S. Husband is adopted. These people chose him and wanted him just to do this to him.